Welcome back, guys. Another episode of the Gophers edition, that Gopher Hockey Puckcast. We're gonna be working that back into the vernacular and I guess the language that we have going for the MNCAA podcast. Episode, I believe, 122. We've been doing this a long time, but Gophers segment here after the first real week of play. Nate Wells here along with Drew Cove. Just a quick recap on the weekend. Icebreaker tournament in the Orleans Casino in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, just off the strip in a very difficult casino to get to if you've ever been to Las Vegas. But the Gophers played there 2 games. They played against Air Force on Friday night, and then Omaha beat UMass, so the Gophers played them on Saturday night. Things went well for the Gophers Friday night, but not necessarily Saturday. 7-1 win handily on Friday, but a 2-1 OT loss to Omaha on Saturday. Nate, I'd say let's just jump into Air Force right away and get into Omaha because I think there's a little bit more to talk about with the Omaha game. But Air Force, obviously Connor Kurth getting a hat trick. I think his line with Matthew Wood and Jimmy Clark looked fantastic, but definitely a lot of goals to go around. And obviously, I should mention it too. Nathan Airy played in net that game. He stopped 25 of 26 shots. So, Nate, your thoughts on the Air Force game and anything, any other additions that you might have to have on Frank Serratori?
Well, credit to the Gophers for hitting sevens in Vegas. And I guess a little bit not for us, where we talked highly of Matthew Wood last week. We talked highly of Jimmy Clark, expecting him to hit that bump, and we didn't bring up Connor Kurth's name at all. And it didn't take long for him to less than 2 minutes for the Gophers and Kurth to get on the board with just some beautiful passing on that opening goal.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's one of those things where you're like, I've been waiting 6 months for college hockey to come back, and look at that. We are back.
He was telling Jimmy Clark, he was probably just saying, you know what? He's like, I was listening to MNCAA the other day. they mentioned you guys, but not me. They're going to pay. Bulletin board material. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, that. I mean, how many times we mentioned Mason Nevers last year? So same thing. We're finally like, it pay off and on the same thing, but it paid. I mean, credit to that line. It looked like just they were ready, they were prepared, and just were by far the best on the ice. And I mean, you got 3 goals by the hat trick by Connor Kurth. You always want to see people get a hat trick, and when it's somebody who is not one of those big star names who does it, it's even better. So 4 points on for there. I mean, you have 3 assists with Matthew Wood in his Gopher debut. He did not look out of place at all. And just you really, really got to be happy with that. You're playing well against a team that can be defensive and can make you really earn goals. And for a good stretch of the game, it looked like that was a good part of the game. That looked like that was going to be with Air Force. But I mean, putting up 7 against a Frank Serratori team, not an easy task.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, not to belabor the whole point about that line, but they looked fast. They looked really, really good. They had a lot of good chemistry. And it just looked like they were really ready to play right away together. But I mean, I thought it was really good to see Jimmy Clark kind of being an anchor on that line and looking decent in the faceoff dot. I think that game, especially, I think Aaron Hughlin went 1 for 11 in faceoffs in that game. But it was good to see Clark in his sophomore season. Obviously, not really a hurried sophomore season, but he wasn't really supposed to be here last year. So it's kind of in the year where he was really supposed to be here the first time. He's looking already accelerated. So he looked good last year, but this could be a real breakout year for him, especially if he plays with a couple of line mates like that. And Connor Kurth too, man. Like if he can be that guy that we've been talking about, like I've been on the point of Brody Lamb for the last few years, I think. But if those 2 guys as juniors can be what the Gophers need from a depth scoring, and we talk about depth all the time, but like if they can really like put up a bunch of goals and look like a top line that doesn't necessarily have all the label, I guess, because Bob doesn't like to always put the labels on those type of things, but if they can have like 2 bona fide number 1 lines, that's going to be such a benefit to them throughout the season and going forward. Obviously, it's 2 games, but if they can keep that stuff up, the way they looked against Air Force, better for the rest of the team is that they have to shuffle other places because that line looks so good. But yeah, it was just another good example of the Gophers scoring a lot of goals. Not to be ominously foreshadowing the next game, but plus Beckett Henderson got his first collegiate goal on Friday as well. So it's definitely a lot to go around. A couple defensemen getting in goals as well. Just another otherwise a good looking showing from a team they were definitely supposed to beat, but not necessarily by that much.
Yeah, a lot of credit on that end. Yeah, I'll say Ryan Chesley there in the Air Force game. I would. You mentioned Brody Lamb, and that's certainly the person who, if I am looking to see what Jimmy Clark's development is from last season to this season, that would be someone who you would really hope to have follow that same path where, in theory, this should be his freshman season. It wasn't. He was put in a position where it obviously would be maybe a little bit better to have him develop more in juniors, which you had with Beck and Henderson. So if you have that where you can still take advantage of someone who has that extra development in college, who maybe is going from that freshman to sophomore year, and you have your sophomores taking that step as upperclassmen, it's a big part of the process for successful teams in college hockey. And just for the Gophers, having the depth of 2-3 lines that can make teams pay on any given night, that is going to be a huge advantage where you are forcing teams to either overly rely on their goalie or have to pick their poison with their top defensive pairings, where it's okay, you can stop you can stop Matthew Wood in this line with Connor Kurth and Jimmy Clark, but if you do so, hey, there's also Jimmy Snuggerud, Oliver Moore, we got some first rounders here, and you know what? Mm-hmm. Hey, they can also do the same thing. Plus, hey, they're going to also force you into taking penalties, and those power plays, not so bad as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's everything you want to see going right for the Gophers early in the season happened against Air Force, and obviously they got to 1-0 on the season at that point, but that only lasted a day, Nate. They got as Omaha beat UMass. Omaha was waiting for the Gophers on Saturday, and to say it was not as offensive a slugfest as it should have been is an understatement. The Gophers, I think, had 56 or 54 shots. I believe
54. I believe it ended with 54.
Okay, yeah. So they had 54 shots. They managed one goal. It was a good-looking goal, kind of a dirty goal with Mason Nevers there. But Omaha got two seeing eye shots on 16 shots. They got 2 goals in the end. It was a kind of a 2-on-1 on a power play for the regulation goal, excuse me. But then early in overtime, kind of on a transition pinch, Omaha comes back and scores another shot that was not really deflected or anything. But I think for Liam Souliere, who played in that game, that's 2 you want back for sure. But the Gophers just got goalied, man. Like that's it's tough to do when you play a defensively structured team like Omaha and a goalie that just plays really well and certainly denies all their shots. But Nate, certainly an unfortunate one after plenty of offensive chances for the Gophers on Saturday night.
Yeah, it's one of those things where at the end of the day, you want to be able to go home with the trophy. You want to have the 2 wins. You want to have some things to work on, but also have a lot of positives. And I think as far as things go, this is probably the next best option where you don't end up with the trophy, you don't get the win, but you lose in overtime. And you lose to probably of the 3 teams, the one that will hurt you the least in the pairwise, where you're not. Where if it's UMass, you lose a lot more comparisons with Hockey East. If it's Air Force, you're really in trouble with the Atlantic Hockey, and that's going to make you drop. You expect Omaha. It's a team that lost to Minnesota in the NCAA's last year, and it was a really tough game. It's still a very tough game. Simon Lakotsi is heck of a goalie. And I mean, we knew that before the 53 saves he made on Saturday. Mm-hmm. But it puts Minnesota in a position where you can say, hey, we played a tight game against a team that expects to make the NCAAs. We're able to control the puck possession offensively. we're able to create high scoring chances. What do we need to do a little bit more to create more goals? Whether we're getting a little bit more in the dirty, some more rebounds in front of the net, whether it's passing the puck a little bit more, whether it's trying to create draw a few more penalties. And it's October. You have things to work on, and there's certainly some things that we'll work on that where there are worse games to lose. I think if you look how the score is, it's certainly something to be disappointed on. But at the end of the day, sometimes you get goalied. It happens. It stinks, but there's certainly some takeaways for Minnesota to take as we go on to Minnesota Duluth next week and just continue on throughout a long 5-6 month season.
Yeah, and it certainly gives the Gophers, I think, an area of obviously a lot of positive vibes coming out of the Air Force game with just a lot going right in the victory. But you see that, all right, you got the one goal you got in a dirty area, and to think of the guys you lost last year, Jackson, Big Body, and Jackson Nelson. Although Bryce Brodzinski, I think his shot just from anywhere was really good, but he could be a pest in front of the net too. And I think some of those older guys that learned how to be at that positioning in front of the opposing net, that's going to be something that they need to develop over this non-conference season to really start to be competitive against those teams. Like, I mean, I think of Omaha and North Dakota in that same mindset of they're going to be really tough to play against. They're going to be really difficult older teams that can really muscle you in front of the net, and having a lot of younger guys necessarily in that position, they're going to have to grow into those roles pretty quickly.
They certainly will, and it's great to come out of a game where I think for how many years have we seen the Gophers where it's say they play well, then they struggle for the opening 10, and they can look sluggish and they can fight their way back. Mm-hmm. And in this case, they looked dominant as heck the first 10-15 minutes of the game. I think it took like 11 or so minutes for Omaha to get its first shot. Mm-hmm. Put up 21 in the first period. And now it's just trying to figure out, and these are things that all teams need to figure out, no matter how experienced or inexperienced you are. It's just how you play when you're playing well, but the goals aren't coming, and how you're playing when you're not able to hit that extra gear. You're able to flip the switch, where it's worked well in the exhibition against St. Cloud, and it worked well in the Air Force game, where especially in that second period where it was 3 goals in less than 3 minutes, where you're able to just find that next gear. You're able to thread things together, and there are times when that's not going to happen, and just creating more offense and creating a positive opportunities when things aren't going as well is a huge undertaking for teams to find throughout the season.
Yeah, and it's going to be important, I think, especially Nate, how the non-conference schedule isn't necessarily as competitive as it has been in recent years for the Gophers. I think from just a heavy hitters standpoint, obviously UMD's on the way back to kind of reestablishing its ranking after last year's tumble, but I think they're going to be up there. I think they were second in receiving votes, but I mean, just kind of getting a game against a bona fide NCAA opponent, I think, is really important early on, because they don't necessarily we don't really know where UMD after that transition, where they sit this coming weekend, and kind of getting against St. Thomas as well the next weekend after that. It's just a lot of teams that we kind of we expect improvement from, but we don't really know for sure. And I do think Omaha is one of those teams that we could see as like, all right, here's a good benchmark early in the season to see where we're at right at the start of the season. And I think it's nothing but good for them to not necessarily get a loss, but to understand how those teams can beat them to get better at it. Because Gophers certainly are going to run into opponents like that later in the season. And if they can't find a way to face that type of adversity early on and beat it, it's going to be not necessarily a quick exit, but I mean, if they can't figure out how to play against a team like Omaha pretty quickly, they're gonna the season might be a short one, even if they make the NCAAs.
We've seen enough times over the years where a good team runs into a very hot goalie, and mm-hmm. It certainly happens. It happens to the best of teams, but at the same time, can you find a way to beat a hot goalie, and that's the question. And I do think, honestly, as far as you're just looking throughout the rest of the Big Ten, And going against Minnesota playing the way that they did against us, against a good Omaha team that, in fairness, did lose a lot, did lose several of their top scorers, and obviously still has the defense, still has the punishing style. But compared to some of the other teams in the Big Ten, I mean, you can't really complain too much. Where a lot of teams held their own, but also you certainly saw a couple of struggles and certainly a couple of questionable results.
Yeah, no, and that's that kind of getting ahead to the rest of the Big Ten schedule too. I know while we're on it right now, let's jump into it before I know we get to a little goalie talk. I think for the Gophers for sure. But Big Ten had a lot of like you said, interesting results. Wisconsin lost in regulation to Lindenwood, and then they had to get to overtime to beat them the next night, but. Michigan State split with BC. That's not a huge surprise. BC's one of the favorites this year, but Michigan won and tied against Arizona State. Ohio State tied AIC. They ended up beating them in the next game, but they tied to them. Penn State lost one game to Quinnipiac, and then Notre Dame beat both St. Louis and Clarkson. That's not a huge surprise there, but a bunch of questionable results, like you said. That's a few interesting ones. Wisconsin, what could we be in for when the Gophers first play Wisconsin this year?
I am still trying to figure out Wisconsin, and those two results do not help at all. I mean, at the end of the year, those are things where if Wisconsin's on the other side, you're going to look back and be like, this weekend, Wisconsin, you lose, and then you need OT to beat Lindenwood. These are not great results. You throw in Charlie Stramel scoring a couple of goals for Michigan State on Saturday, and man, like I think you're already wondering what's going on in Madison. That is about as bad of a start as things can go. Where not only does you need overtime to beat Lindenwood to avoid a sweep, but you needed a 2-goal comeback to pull it off, and that is. And in fairness, hey, our old friend Baraskevich was in goal for Lindenwood, so maybe a little bit there, but at the same time, you're like those are results that when I came across them, I was shocked to see. I did not expect that from Wisconsin, even though I still can't catch a read on Wisconsin. I did not expect anything like that. You don't expect that from a Mike Hastings team.
Yeah, no, and that's not trying to get ahead of it too much, but I wonder if his spot's back open at Mavericks at Mankato to see if he ever wanted to come back. But no, that's definitely getting way ahead of any shelf life that a bona fide coach such as him would need to worry about right now. But Wisconsin, obviously, another year of flux. Year number 2 for Mike Hastings just got to be, and there was a lot of roster changes. You got to assume that they're just still figuring themselves out and figuring how to do things, because obviously they were ahead of the curve last year, I think, in figuring things out. But now they're just going to have to learn how to be the best version of the team that they got. So certainly a very interesting weekend, not just for Wisconsin, but for everybody around the Big Ten as well. So that I think that bodes well for the Gophers, given that. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I think Notre Dame going up to the North, playing the North Country teams and beating both is huge. I mean, I don't know if I would expect the Fighting Irish to beat both of them in that type of weekend, but doing so certainly helps. Penn State fell to Quinnipiac at Quinnipiac, but they made it interesting. They came back and really fought for that tying goal at the end, which is certainly a great positive step for the Nittany Lions. And I don't think they played Quinnipiac before. I know they had not played at Quinnipiac before. So that's certainly a new experience for several of those teams. Michigan State coming back, especially after losing Friday to beat BC, for me is also another. It kind of goes along that same lines of you have teams where when things aren't going, like you're seeing teams respond from bad, or just not bad losses, but just situations where just things aren't going right. And just, I think for me, that's kind of the big thing, especially with Michigan, like seeing that with the Michigan State in a top 5 battle with BC, where you're like, okay, they're holding their own against one of the top Hockey East teams. Notre Dame is going to help out with some of those ECAC wins. There's the only bad loss is Wisconsin to Lindenwood. And so these are all things that certainly we're still figuring things out with as far as non-conference goes. We won't really catch a full picture for a few more weeks, if not more. But you do still at least feel good about the Big Ten, at least on that end as a whole. And I mean, the Gophers contribute to that with a win and an overtime loss, which doesn't hurt as much, and a performance that it looks much better. Looks much better than the result says.
Yeah, and certainly as you can be deep into talking about it for about 20 minutes here, deep into maybe listening about it for 20 minutes, it does seem like, all right, deep in the minutia of a 2-game series at the very start of the year, how much does it really mean? We're going to learn a lot more about all these teams, and they're going to all settle into probably a more consistent place rather than wild. Is Wisconsin cooked, or are they going to be at the bottom of the Big Ten? I don't think that. Nate certainly doesn't think so, speaking for Nate, but I don't think many people think that either. But I mean, it's definitely just a wild weekend and showing that a lot of interesting things can happen in the first weekend of real college hockey play. But in terms of a lot of different things happening, Nate, back to the Gophers. Some interesting. I know we talked a little bit last week about just the goalie situation. I know I wanted to see the flip of what happened. I wanted to see Soulier against Air Force, and I wanted to see Erie against Omaha, but that was different this weekend. And Erie looking good against Air Force, and then Soulier not facing a ton of shots against Omaha, but letting a few in that were just unscreened. But what do you think? Do you think, if anything, that means anything for the Gophers? I guess in terms of, specifically Soulier, and I still think that to me, it seems like they're still just going to get, until further notice, it's going to be 1 game in, 1 game out for each of them, 1 game per weekend. But I just know that probably Soulier getting himself settled in front of this defense that he hasn't played with before, and against a tough team like Omaha as well, but just kind of getting his feet wet for the Gophers and kind of understanding that goaltending situation. Nate, what are your thoughts just kind of on how those goalies are going to look going forward and to start the year?
It'll be a little easier to make some comparisons next weekend after playing the same team.
Yep.
Able to do the split. I went back and forth on whether or not I liked putting Erie first before Soulier, and the more I think about it, the more I do like. I kind of do like the thought process behind it, where it's let's let Erie get comfortable. Let's give him we'll give him the first start. We'll put him against a team that he's only played a couple times in college, where you put him against probably the easier of the 2 teams. No matter who end up playing against UMass or Omaha, let's be honest, Air Force is probably the easier offense. As much as we love Frank Serratori and we love the Air Force teams, we love the service academies. Just it's, I mean, this is pretty much how it's played out throughout 4 games of the season for the Falcons. So on that end, maybe just letting him gain a little bit of confidence, put him in a position where he doesn't have to win, but he certainly needs to hold serve, and that was certainly what he did on Friday against Air Force. And then Soulier, who has the NCAA experience, who has certainly been in that for years and has been counted on. You have him play against a team that is been an NCAA, either or, it doesn't matter which one. They're both NCAA tournament teams, and have them be in certainly the little bit of the tougher situation. And for me, I like it. It was he didn't win the game. It wasn't. I wouldn't say loss. I'm sure both of them. I'm sure any goal that you give up, you want back. But just with how the game went, how the game is, where if you can only get 1 goal on 54 shots, it's a tough spot to be in, where you're asking a lot of it, and just at the end of the day, it's certainly 1 game, and it's going to be more interesting to see how both play next week against Duluth.
Yeah, and I think there was something, I'm probably misremembering it to some degree, but I remember Don Lucia would always say, just, first to 3, like just keep it under 3 and you're good. So, I mean, I think through Liam Soulier there. Obviously, not a whole lot of shots against, but he certainly did not lose the Gophers that game. I just think from a standpoint, like you can't expect the goalie to give up 2 goals and to only score 1 and still just be like, you know what, the Gophers needed to score a few more there. Got goalie like we talked about earlier, but certainly,
Also, if any goalie is used to like being on the other side of a 54 or 16 like shot per or whatever, it's probably the guy who spent multiple years in state college. So yeah.
Exactly. It's something he's used to, but Liam Soulier is certainly going to get his fair share of wins this year for the Gophers. But it will be interesting to see this coming weekend, kind of moving into next steps here, Nate. Like we mentioned, UMD on the docket. 2 games at Duluth, not the home and home as we've seen the last few years. So Gophers fans, go ahead, make a weekend of it. It might be a little past peak fall colors. I'm trying to think. I was in like central Wisconsin this weekend as well, and it was already seeming like, all right, there's tons of red and auburn on trees, and maybe next weekend will be a little too soon to get rid of it for it to all be gone. But maybe a nice drive up to Duluth and a good weekend up in Duluth. For any Gophers fans thinking about going. But I do, like you mentioned, Nate, with the goalies, I think it will be nice to see the comparison against the same team, a team that split against UMass Lowell out in Lowell this past weekend. Nate, what do you think? Obviously, like we mentioned, we touched on just a little bit earlier, kind of coming back from injuries, and certainly an interesting transition year for the Bulldogs. But what do you think, kind of with UMD and the Gophers facing off this weekend?
Well, it's always a tough contest being up in Duluth, being up in Amsoil, where played the Gophers. That arena gets packed. Played when they play Minnesota. It's one of the big events. Playing Duluth it's a tough time, even in the quote unquote down years for the Bulldogs. Bringing in right now, I mean their key selling point right now is just the freshman class that they brought in, where just the names, where it's you have players who spent that extra year or so in juniors, got an opportunity, who maybe even were ready now, and just so you have it where this might not be the year, this might not be the time for the Bulldogs. Really coming off where they lost in overtime to Bemidji. They split against a UMass Lowell team that I believe is looking to be predicted towards the bottom of Hockey East. So there's some positives to take away from the Bulldogs, but there's also certainly a work in progress state to go for. So if you're Minnesota, it's a tough road trip. It's going to be a tough battle, but this isn't them going against the 2-time defending champs or anything that we've seen in our recent memories.
Yeah, and like you said, in recent years, Gophers have. I remember Bob Motzko. I think early might have been his first year, but they were there for the banner raising.
They were. It was the icebreaker.
Opening. Yep. And they sat through the opening. He intentionally had the team sit through that to understand what it's like to see that feeling and to see the feeling on the face of the players and the fans to understand what it means to raise a national championship banner. And I think it certainly has changed a lot since then, as the Gophers are kind of on the rise and certainly in a much better position than when Bob took over the program. But still looking for that national championship for them. But it's certainly not as I guess not as tough of a test as going against a defending 2-time national championship UMD team.
Yeah, actually, that is a fun. You mentioned, I was there in that building. I think I asked Bob about it because he had the entire team out there on the bench. It's probably one of their in like a deleted lead somewhere where for that 23 championship game or 22. Thinking about it in Boston. But you see kind of the growth of the Gophers there, where they were very young. They were very young when he took over, having to bring in players because they lost players, having no room to fully develop, trying to get older, trying to get bigger, trying to continue to bring in some diamonds in the rough. And while aside some of the stars of college hockey, and you look at the Gopher pipeline, you look at who they have in now, and I mean, this is the program that Bob Motzko envisioned. And it's really funny kind of seeing that coming back to Duluth, coming back to the place where for him it began with Minnesota.
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting weekend, I think, for sure, to learn a lot. Learn a lot of consistency things about the Gophers, I think, in terms of just, all right, are they gonna look like they did against Air Force? Or is there gonna be kind of an inability to finish at various times, or a lot of other things that we're still looking to learn about the Gophers this coming weekend in Duluth. But Nate, final thought, favorite Duluth attraction. That's just one thing. I know it's just it's I don't know the last time you were up in Duluth, but what's your favorite thing to do when you're in Duluth besides going to Amsoil and watching the game?
You know, it's funny. The last time I was up in Duluth was the time we just mentioned in 2018. It was those 2 days. It was those 2 days, and it was also, I don't remember. It was like, I remember if it was like the hunting opener or something, or just like it's just Duluth in October. But like, I had to drive back and forth because like the nearest, like all the hotels were either sold out in like June, or sold out, or like $400 a night, and like the outlet I was writing for at the time wouldn't pay for it. So it's just like, this is just going to be cheaper and easier for me to drive back and forth.
Yep.
And I did that. So I think I'm trying to, was that 7? Yeah. So I did that. I did that one, and then the women's team also played that weekend too. So like I covered like multiple games that weekend as well, and I wrote a feature with Maddie Rudy and Kelly Panic, and like did that, and it's part of the game, so I remember that now. But so always fun time. I always enjoy Duluth. I would say it's not a hidden gem for Minnesota.
No,
it's a hidden gem. It's like a hidden gem nationally though. It's always nice going over Thompson Hill and just kind of seeing Lake Superior. I don't know. It's something just always makes my day doing that. But favorite place, I mean, Northern Waters is always just always hits the spot. Hoops after walking over like a little bit to hoops after the game is always nice. Obviously, we got to give a shout out to Ben Paddle.
Yep, exactly. Ben Paddle right here. Be sure to go check him out.
Yeah, there's so many. There's so many of those places in Duluth where it's nice. It's something I find more out east than I do in the Midwest, where you get all these nice, like you'll get the towns where you have these nice little main street, but you have these nice little mom and pop shops. And there's a few places in Minnesota that do have it, but like out here, it's like every kind of town has it, because it's kind of, especially in the areas are kind of built around the railroads going into New York City. It's always built around the railroad station, and like it's just, you have these nice little mom and pop places. Like the restaurants are beautiful. Everyone has like 2 great bagel shops, and pizza's amazing. And I mean, in Minnesota, a lot of that it's the beer, the barbecue, just some great restaurants. I think Duluth's I will say Duluth's not underrated, but it's underrated restaurant scene.
Oh yeah, no. You mentioned bagels. My girlfriend is in Montreal right now, and that makes me jealous for a good real bagel right now.
Yes.
But when it comes to Duluth, man, I mean, last time I think I was in Duluth was it was one of the home and homes. I drove up, covered the game, drove back home by myself, I think in the same night. But one thing I did do when I stopped there, I went early to make sure I went to OMC Smokehouse, just kind of on the south side of Duluth. But that place, just every time I'm there, one of my favorites. And it's I wish I'd be going back this coming weekend. But so if you're stopping there, or if you're stopping at any of the places we talked about too, be sure to tag us. Be sure to tag us on Twitter at Gopher State for Nate, at Cove Drew for me, at MN_NCAA. Tag Ben Paddle. Any of the places you go to, feel free to take pictures and make us just a little bit or a lot of bit jealous. But Nate, I mean, exciting weekend coming up against Duluth. We'll be here to talk about it and even preview the next upcoming one. Not to get ahead of ourselves too much, but we'll be here watching them and talking about it. So until next week, Gopher fans, be sure to stay tuned and enjoy watching the games. But until next week, we will see you at the rink.